I will make a bet about you because you learn and act, but you sabotage yourself, others sabotage you, and you still don't have the results that you desire. I want you to pause, please, for a moment, because I don't want you to try to be fixing the results if you have not understood how the system that gets it even works and how to maximize. It will be like trying to hack a government's entire tax system to give you what you want without knowing how a computer or coding even works. Look, the difference between someone who stays average and someone who builds, leads, and adapts is not only the level at which they process reality, which is the mindset, and I'm gonna show it to you. It's how aware they are of that same process. And that methodology is what we will be covering. Therefore, I will walk you through where do all of your automatic behaviors and therefore results come from, how your reward systems were conditioned since childhood, and how other systems and people use them at their benefit. Moreover, I will give you the 10 cognitive levels that go from raw reaction to extended autonomous and self-evolving intelligence. I do this so that it enables you to know where you are, why, and what it takes to move up, while you are recognizing why people stay in loops, smart people fail to act, and why a few lucky individuals seem to operate in a completely different universe. So let's begin. The brain is constantly trying to optimize for survival, predictability, social attachment, and energy conservation. Not just freedom, purpose, dream life, and all that cool stuff. And that's why people completely misunderstand themselves. Because when you repeat an experience enough times, your brain physically adapts to it. This is called synaptic plasticity, or neuroplasticity. Neurons that fire together wire together, as they say, goes the same. And this means that whatever repeatedly harms you will create neuronal connections, and therefore automatic behaviors to avoid it more easily and automatically over time, and the same with the opposite, the things that reward you. Weak neural pathways becoming stronger through repetition is what you can see here. If every single time you took social risks, you were rejected, embarrassed, or judged, your brain starts associating uncertainty with danger. If every time you also obeyed instructions you receive validation or safety, your brain starts associating following what someone else says with survival. So I'm gonna explain it real quick. Neurons are like a water hose. So what you have inside that water hose, instead of it being water, is actually electricity, more specifically ions, which are atoms with more or less energy, electrons than normal. But just so you picture this well, the reason why you have pain, or at least I have pain when I touch myself here in the arm, is because I am pressing down, I'm stepping on the hose. Then the hose is of course going to release the water at a much higher pressure, more stress. And that's why I can feel when I touch myself. Now, if some of that electricity, which usually does, reaches your brain, then it's going to go through the neurons, which are nerves, but tinier and much more for the brain. And just like two friends, the more they communicate between each other, the more friends they're gonna be, and their relationship is gonna get bigger and stronger, right? But if they don't talk a lot, then their hearts are gonna be broken. They're gonna have a really weak relationship, and the chance of them talking to each other intimately is gonna be much smaller. And that happens same, but with neurons and physically. They literally shrink or get bigger. This is ultra important. I can't stress this enough, because this is the key you need to know to also not only be aware of yourself, but also know how to communicate with others, how you create your habits, how do you get to force yourself, control yourself into being disciplined, or even know how do you reward yourself, or how does your intuition work, how can you innovate, and so many things. The thing is that eventually the process becomes so automatic that you mistake conditioning for personality, or as the internet likes to say, identity. I'm just not disciplined, I'm just lazy, I'm just anxious, I'm just not an entrepreneur at all. Maybe you are, but even more, maybe your nervous system simply adapted to the environments that repeatedly shape it. Probably you have already tried and you have seen that your brain is not trying to make you successful. What I'm saying is that it is trying to make you predictable. And that, what I just said about predictability, is the biggest insight I have ever had. A bonus. There are some natural automatic behaviors that every being that's considered human have very similarly. And whenever humans share similar patterns, that's called a heuristic. When you call or DM a lead or a prospect coldly, very probably their brain will automatically start predictable defense mechanism to conserve energy that usually sounds like, I'm not interested, right? And behind it is a representativeness heuristic, it's called, because the brain makes an instant judgment based on stereotypes and usually only takes like the negative stuff. It's that representativeness heuristic plus negativity bias, which is another heuristic that humans have. Because your opening format, like the DM notification or the tone, mirrors the segmental prototype of a sleazy salesman, the prospect automatically assigns all the negative traits of that stereotype to you, completely ignoring your actual value. And moreover, you can also have the availability heuristic, which in that case is when the prospect relies on the easiest, most recent memories to make a snap decision. All because of this sucker copy they received in their email that didn't give any value. And they deleted it, but they assumed that you were gonna be the same. And this starts extremely early. Look, a baby is not born with long-term vision, independent thinking, emotional regulation, or strategic planning. A baby is born and optimized for attachment, survival, and short-term rewards, and pattern recognition. And then that child enters systems like family, school, and social groups. So as you can see on this little diagram I made in this visualization, you can see that humans are inherently searching for certainty, because what synapses are trying to do is just to make you predictable. And so when institutions, families, social groups, whatever, they give you a predictable way of behaving and getting survival, which is what the brain wants, then you also get automated, sort of, to predict and want and always pursue what was in that environment that people gave to you. But the key thing here is that was not reality, because what you lived as a kid was not complete reality. Now there is uncertainty, ambiguity, self-direction, competition, risk, independent decision-making, delayed gratification, and real consequences that could cost you your survival and your life. Nobody gave you a roadmap when you were in this condition, kind of bubble reality. You have to pay taxes, insurance, all of this stuff. It's made for you as long as you follow instructions, are structured, follow authority, and all this stuff. This, of course, creates one of the biggest psychological contradictions in modern life. I have seen it a lot, because people logically want freedom, but emotionally crave predictability. So you consciously want growth, but subconsciously want familiarity. There are three factors that condition you. The first one is your biology, your genes, right? You're human. You have certain characteristics that are only to you, and that's why there are heuristics, because usually the brain takes a specific way to develop itself. But the other one are the living beings around you. The brain uses those beings, those other living beings, to develop itself much faster. And this works a lot because, as you know, humans were in really cold places, in really hot ones, in the jungle, in the desert, whatever, and of course they needed specific people that already knew the secrets of that biome, of that area, or what animals hunt, right? To get to know insider information quickly and adapt as soon as possible. The third factor is reality itself. When you start iterating, that is, you start testing, you start making hypotheses, and then you start testing it against real life and looking at the results. You're not listening to living beings only, but you are actually listening to reality, which I think is what is the best thing that has ever existed. It's the thing that brought us to the moon and made the iPhone or the Android, the whatever you're looking at this from. And so at the end, of course, your nervous system, especially your brain, usually chooses familiarity first before anything. And that is the first and most used synapses or automatic behaviors, what I was talking about, that you have been using, especially when everything was predictable. It becomes even more brutal when someone tries to build something unpredictable, like in entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship psychologically attacks almost every conditioning pattern. There is no guaranteed reward, no guaranteed validation, no certainty, no stable timeline, no immediate proof that you are succeeding. And sometimes you work for months with almost no visible results. And moreover, everybody around you starts questioning your decisions. Feels like freaking heck. I personally, quick bonus, I just accept it as is. You can't change it. It's not gonna rain burgers if you're hungry, right? The universe is not personal, making you angry because no one understands you and all this stuff. That's something you have to choose at the end. Now, this is where many people collapse back into the default path because their nervous system was optimized for environments where predictability meant safety, which doesn't mean that you're weak, but it does mean that when uncertainty increases too much, the brain interprets it like danger and tries to go to what worked before for survival. Then as a plus, people start saying things like, hey, maybe I should be more realistic, maybe this path is not for you, maybe you should do what everybody else is doing. But many times that is not the truth. That is just conditioning, speaking for fear that they have. Being mortal makes you have survival instincts from genes. And those survival instincts need prediction. So your prediction systems produce fear to avoid stuff that harms you. And fear produces pride when the prediction system calculates based on assumptions. Then you condition others around you to think the same way. The problem is not the fear itself, and it is instead trying to get to know based on assumptions. Trying to know based on assumptions is a fallacy. And from a fallacy always come more fallacies. Which I believe makes assumptions an absolute negative thing. And society itself reinforces this loop unintentionally as well. Because social groups reward familiarity, algorithms, they reward emotional reactions, marketing rewards certainty. Parents usually reinforce safety upside down. They don't hate your ambition, but they love even more your survival, which prompts them to seek for what everybody else does or what worked for our ancestors, even if they want to support you. Now imagine what happens when someone suddenly decides to think independently. When they build differently, they question assumptions, they tolerate uncertainty voluntarily, and that person is no longer operating from the same psychological model most people inherited unconsciously. And now, this is where we enter a huge deep secret I don't see everybody talking about. These are the difference at which humans beings process reality itself at different levels. At the first level, there is reaction. It is pure instinct, stimulus, and response. It has automatic emotional behavior. And when something happens, you react. There's no reflection, just prediction and protection. That was a rhyme. And this level is necessary, by the way, because if a car suddenly appears in front of you, you don't want to philosophize about the existential meaning of tires before moving out of the freaking way. So you have some insider information. Not every single signal, every stimuli you get from reality always goes to your brain. Sometimes, usually, it goes through something called the spinal cord, which is right on my back, and yours as well. And it's basically the airport of nerves. So it connects the whole body to one single spinal cord, one single airport of nerves. And usually when something goes through the spinal cord, some electricity goes upwards and the brain receives a copy, but not completely. Sometimes, if you, for example, you touch a hot stove, then it's gonna go automatically to your spinal cord, and then it's gonna go back immediately. So you freaking it's not there anymore, and then your brain is gonna get sort of a copy of what happened because it went through the spinal cord, which is connected to the brain, but it was not completely made by the brain. Therefore, you, instead of saying, "Oh no, I touched a hot stove at 40 degrees Celsius," you say, "What the heck happened?" Now, many people live almost permanently here emotionally. They comes conditioned rules without experimentation. You follow patterns because they became associated with safety, identity, or belonging. This is where, of course, good students, good workers, good citizens, or even good children can unconsciously emerge from. And it's not because you constantly choose those identities, but because repeating those behaviors reduce uncertainty. All right. Look, now I want to explain this little illustration that I have here, and I'm gonna make it like this. So let's say that these 4 lines that I have vertically, they are nerves. They are neurons exactly. So you see a snake, and then your brain is going to choose, what am I going to activate? Am I going to activate the patterns, the system of the network that is going to make me dance, or am I going to activate the one that is going to make me run? So at first, when you're learning, you might try to dance when you see a snake, when you're a child, right? Or you might try to get a little bit scared, but you're like, I don't know, you're just activating the one that dances, and you have a prediction error, because then that snake might bite you. I know it might be really bad, but it can happen, and it happens because this is a prediction error. So humans see something from reality, and then they usually get a prediction error. And when that happens, then the brain is gonna make that thing salient, it's called. So it's gonna be important. Salience is just, that thing is important, it's relevant to me. And then it's gonna change with neuroplasticity, which is what I explained about the synapses and the neuronal connections, how they get bigger or smaller depending on their usage. Then you're gonna update yourself, you're gonna iterate yourself to predict even better what you should do. So the next time, probably the brain is gonna try to just run and say, this is the correct path. Or another thing, prediction error there is, the more confusing, the more angry it makes you. Right after the second cognitive level, then comes conditioned experimentalism. At this level, your consciousness starts appearing more strongly, and you begin testing reality a bit more instead of only inheriting it. So you start asking, what happens if I do this differently? And this is usually where entrepreneurs, creators, rebels, explorers, and innovators psychologically begin. But this level isn't stable because experimentation creates uncertainty, and uncertainty activates fear. So many people temporarily experiment, fail once, then get judged socially, and collapse right back into conditioning. Just so you can jump between levels. You can be a level 10 and then go to level 3, or even have them at the same time. I will say that you only can have maximum 3 cognitive levels functioning at once, but you can have many. A stressed billionaire, of course, can emotionally behave like a terrified child. A brilliant entrepreneur can suddenly avoid simple decisions, or even a confident person can become approval seeking again. As I was saying, the fear is a compression of cognition and consciousness. This is why self-awareness matters so much. It's because if you cannot observe your own patterns, you confuse temporary emotional states with objective reality. And then comes condition, because if you cannot observe your own patterns, you confuse temporary emotional states with objective reality. You don't want to make a permanent decision based on a temporal situation. Then comes conditioned reflection. And this is where someone starts asking, why do I think like this? Where did this belief come from? Why do I keep repeating the same patterns? And be really transparent with you, most people never stay here long enough because real self-awareness is uncomfortable. So the moment you realize that, wait, some of my ambitions, fears, insecurities, political beliefs, and identity, even life goals, might partially come from conditioning. So your ego starts panicking. Because now you're no longer just protecting yourself, and you're questioning the structure that created your sense of self in the first place. I personally define ego biologically and therefore more realistically as the group of spatial neuronal connections that have the highest bonding, and therefore your brain wants to protect the most, because they are your most repeated predictors and therefore automatic behaviors. So ego, I don't think it's a bad thing. Your ego even is what makes you confident. If you don't have an ego, you're not confident. You can easily be influenced by other people as well. What I think is really negative is pride, because it is based on assumptions and therefore makes you fall to more like here the first of the second level. Then comes unconditioned reflection. And this is where someone starts intentionally redesigning their life instead of merely reacting to it. So long-term thinking appears, delayed gratification becomes more possible, and principles become more important than emotional impulses. So you stop asking what feels safe and start asking what actually works. Then eventually comes systems thinking. This is where you're not looking only at isolated events, but you're looking at interconnected loops. You stop seeing failure, success, politics, relationships, business, marketing, society, and identity as separate things. And you instead start seeing feedback systems interacting with each other constantly. At this point, you realize something extremely important, and it is that most people are not consciously choosing their lives nearly as much as they believe they are. In reality, living beings around them and their biology is choosing for them, especially the living beings that were around them. Your environment shapes patterns, shape emotions, and emotions shape decisions. Then decisions reinforce identity, recreates the environment. I also think this is the best level to start self-improvement. And notice, please, something terrifying, because there doesn't need even to be a mastermind controlling society like the Illuminati or something for comforting and mass manipulation to happen. The loop sustains itself. There is not other person, not necessarily from afar watching, because people seek predictability, institutions reward predictability, and therefore you have predictable behavior, and which becomes socially normalized, and children inherit those norms grounded on predictability. Then fear of predictability increases, as some people go back to predictability after being on unpredictable paths they consider they failed on, and allegedly, even though that might not be true at all. When someone suddenly tries to leave the unpredictable path, they don't only face external resistance, they face also internal resistance too. Because I was talking about what other people told you, but you yourself, you also have some contradictions here. That's why visible failure feels so freaking painful. It's not only because of money or results or something like that, it is because visible failure threatens identity, belonging, and status, and predictability simultaneously. This is also why society criticizes unconventional paths so aggressively. So good. Once someone starts seeing systems instead of isolated events in this cognitive level, another transition begins, and the seventh level comes, which is synthetic cognition. This is where people stop merely operating inside existing systems and begin redesigning them. At this level, someone can simplify complexity without becoming way too simplistic and making assumptions. This is a very important distinction, because saying everything is meaningless or just work hard, bro, are both cognitively lazy conclusions pretending to explain reality completely. Real systems thinking and this synthetic cognition accepts that multiple things can be true simultaneously. You can have free will and condition, and society can help you or limit you. Fear can protect you and sabotage you, and money can solve problems or create new ones. Reality starts becoming, of course, just binary, and this is where many great leaders, builders, and scientists and entrepreneurs start operating visibly. So here people don't reinvent the wheel, but they synthesize it. That is, they take some of the best working parts to create something unique based on existing stuff. But what happens when someone does reinvent the wheel or just create something entirely new? Theoretical creation. This is where someone starts building frameworks, industries, cultures, or systems that change how people think and behave. A great leader does not only manage people, but they influence the emotional reality people operate from. And this is why communication becomes so freaking important at high cognitive levels. Because communication is not just speaking, and instead it is an alignment of realities. You are trying to transfer an invisible structure inside your mind into somebody's brain. That is why misunderstanding is so common. So two people can hear the exact same words while processing completely different realities internally. Then cognition reaches something even stranger, and it is meta-creation. This is a ninth level. This is where someone no longer only creates things inside systems, but starts redesigning the rules that generate the systems themselves. So now the person is asking, what creates culture? What creates identity? What creates market beliefs, mass behavior? And at this point, someone starts influencing generations instead of just moments. This is where philosophers, civilization builders, scientists, inventors, and not just because they are magically superior beings, but because they are operating at the level of conditions instead of outcomes. Most people try changing outcomes directly, but higher condition changes the system producing the outcomes. That is a gigantic difference. Modern systems take advantage of this psychology everywhere, especially in marketing, social media, and politics. Humans are highly manipulable under uncertainty, because if someone feels confused, afraid, which is an instant driver, or directionless, which is the origin fear, I will say is the biggest driver, their brain starts searching desperately for cognitive relief. And the easiest relief is oversimplification from all the overwhelming information you might receive, which is instant certainty. That is why outrage spreads faster than nuance, tribalism spreads faster than complexity, and identity attachment spreads much faster than even reflection. Certainty itself conserves energy, and the brain loves it. And modern algorithms learn this perfectly. The more emotionally reactive you become, the more predictable you become, and therefore the easier you are to influence, so to polarize and control emotionally. This is why testimonials, social proof, authority, tribal identity, and emotional narratives work so well in marketing. Because people do not only buy products, and instead, most of the time, they are just buying certainty. Humans love the promise that everything will be okay if you follow this path. And imagine telling that to a primate who a caveman, right? It's the same nowadays. Because underneath all ambition, politics, competition, status, and ego, most people are simply trying to feel safe in a reality they barely understand, and rather assume, oversimplify, and this stuff that I have been talking about. Then comes transcendence. So I'm gonna explain it to you because transcendence sounds like some religious thing, but look, when someone starts realizing that even their own thinking is incomplete, they begin stress testing themselves constantly. Their beliefs, their emotions, their assumption, their identity, and their worldview. And this creates a very strange psychological state where only reality matters. And whatever does not align with it should be terminated. Because the more aware you become, the harder it becomes to fully lie to yourself. So you start noticing your own ego in real time, your defense mechanisms, your emotional distortions, your own contradictions, and this is why extremely self-aware people sometimes appear calm externally, but internally feel enormous cognitive tension. Reality is no longer just, am I right? And instead it becomes, what is true, even if my ego dislikes it. Because what you're doing here is basically reconstructing your ego. That's painful. This enables you to consciously redesign how you think, not just what you think, how. And at this point, someone understands something that most people, I think, never fully realize, and it is that your mind is not static, it is adaptive. Meaning that your identity, your emotional reactions, your tolerance for uncertainty, your beliefs and habits, ambitions, even your own perception of reality, they can all evolve through conscious iteration. And this is why freedom is not doing just whatever you want impulsively, and that is usually that thing about freedom is just unconscious conditioning wearing a cool outfit, and we call it, I don't know, money or happiness or whatever you call freedom. But the most real freedom is becoming conscious enough to observe the systems running you before automatically they run you. The most valuable thing you can do is to be aware of your own cognitive processes, both biologically and realistically, and how do others do the same. That's what we usually call psychology, sales, communication, all this stuff. Because every human being is running multiple layers simultaneously. Biology, emotion, conditioning, memory, social programming, fear, desire, identity, and most people never question them deeply enough. So they inherit emotional patterns. Then their children reinforce them socially, defend them politically, monetize them economically even, and die believing they consciously chose all of it when they did it. But once you become aware of the process itself, becoming present without judgment or labeling, something changes completely. It's something that gives you psychological fulfillment because you stop identifying completely with every impulse. So every fear, every emotional prediction, inherited belief, you begin separating between what did I consciously choose from what was repeatedly installed into me. That is actual freedom. Not escaping society, reacting structure, becoming emotionless, or it's just becoming conscious enough to intentionally decide what deserves to remain inside you, and also what no longer aligns with reality. Because at the end of the day, the real danger is no society controlling your mind, because it either way knows. It is living your entire life through unconscious patterns you never realized they were shaping you in the first place. And hey, if you made it this far, then probably you realize this video wasn't really about motivation. It was about awareness. Because once you start seeing the systems running your behavior, your decisions, your fears, your identity, your ambitions, you cannot fully unsee them anymore. So I decided to put together two completely free frameworks for you. And the first one is the full cognitive levels document. This is a summary. The full document is really insightful, and it is pretty simple. I want to give it to you so you can actually study the hierarchy yourself, apply it, and identify where your own thinking collapses, evolves, or becomes conditioned. The second one is something that I personally use constantly, called the AFCA framework. It is a decision-making framework I use to stop emotional impulses, reduce stupid decisions, and think more clearly under uncertainty. Both frameworks are completely free without the free little nonsense of or the become millionaire in 6 days type of stuff. Just tools that generally help me think more clearly and act more intentionally. I want to give it to you. You can click on the first link of the description to get them. And finally, look, the moment you become aware of the systems shaping your mind, just stop being completely controlled by them. I stand for your best, because only that will matter. And take care.